My name is Clara Mendoza, and at 47, I'd finally thought I understood how stability worked. You worked hard, you showed up early, you didn't cause waves. For 12 years, that had been enough. Until the morning Marcus Vail, our CEO, stood in front of a room of executives and announced structural downsizing. The word downsize sounded sterile, like something you could disinfect. I sat at the back of the conference hall, pretending to take notes while his voice bounced off the glass walls. The moment he said effective immediately, I felt the floor tilt beneath me. 2 hours later, HR called. The message was short. Clara, could you step in for a quick chat? Quick meant final. The human resources manager, a woman who couldn't meet my eyes, slid a single envelope across the table. Helion Dynamics appreciates your years of service, but your position has been eliminated. I didn't ask why. I didn't even speak. I just nodded, picked up the envelope, and tried to keep my hands from shaking. 7 days before bonuses. They didn't even bother to hide the timing. When I walked back through the open plan office, the silence was heavier than words. No one looked up from their screens. 12 years of shared deadlines and coffee breaks vanished in a single walk to the elevator. My desk, stripped down to a few framed photos and a coffee mug, looked smaller than I remembered. Outside, Seattle rain fell in a thin, relentless sheet. I carried the box of my things to the car, listening to the soft thud of drops against cardboard. The smell of wet asphalt filled the air sharp, metallic, almost cruel. At home, the quiet was worse. Daniel's jacket still hung on the chair by the door, untouched since the day he'd gone to the hospital. The bills were still spread across the kitchen counter, waiting for the bonus I'd been promised. I set the box down and sank into the nearest chair. Rain ticked against the window, steady as a metronome. After 12 years, I whispered, "That's it." The room didn't answer, but somewhere inside me, something small and cold began to stir. The next morning, I drove back to the office to collect what was left of my life there. HR had said I could come in before lunch, while it's quiet. That was code for before anyone sees you. The lobby smelled of burnt coffee and printer toner, like every other morning I'd ever known. But today it felt foreign, sterile, like I was trespassing. My badge still worked. Maybe they hadn't gotten around to revoking it yet, or maybe no one had cared enough. When the elevator doors opened onto the 5th floor, the hush was absolute. A few heads turned, then quickly ducked back behind monitors. I walked to my desk and found a small cardboard box waiting for me. Someone had already started packing my things, a framed photo of Daniel from before the cancer, the mug that said "World's Okayest Boss," a half-empty bottle of aspirin. My stapler was gone. Even the little plant I kept by the window was wilted. I ran a finger along the edge of the photo frame, tracing Daniel's smile. He used to visit me here sometimes, back when the company still held Friday lunches and Marcus wasn't CEO yet. We used to joke that if I ever stopped running projects, the place would crumble. Turns out, I was the one who crumbled first. As I folded the flaps of the box shut, something inside me hardened. The sadness didn't vanish, it just changed shape. It became quieter, sharper. I remembered the contract I'd closed 2 weeks earlier, $68 million with a defense subcontractor outside Denver. Everyone had celebrated in that same glass conference room where Marcus fired me. The emails had called it transformational, the biggest deal of the quarter. Bonuses were supposed to be record-breaking. Now I was out, conveniently. I carried the box through the maze of desks, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. Outside, the drizzle had returned, turning the parking lot into a mirror of gray sky. I set the box in the back seat and started the car, but I didn't drive home. I just sat there, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror, and realized that timing, especially in business, is never an accident. That night, I couldn't sleep. The rain hadn't stopped since afternoon. It beat against the windows like a metronome counting down the hours I no longer belonged anywhere. The box from my desk sat on the floor beside the couch, unopened. I stared at it for a long time, then reached for the folder tucked inside the one labeled Employment Records. Helion Dynamics had changed logos twice since I started, but the contract inside still bore the original one, printed in deep blue ink when the company was smaller, when it still felt human. My signature was there, neat and careful, next to the old CEO's. I'd forgotten how proud I'd been that day. I was one of the first senior women they hired into defense, contracting a rarity back then. I read through the pages slowly, letting the legal jargon pull me away from the ache in my chest. Then my eyes caught something on page 9. Section 15B. If employee is terminated without cause, they are entitled to 15% of the company's quarterly net profit in lieu of bonus or severance. For a second, I thought I was reading it wrong. 15%, not of my department, not of project revenue of the company's entire quarterly profit. I read it again, twice, tracing the clause with my fingertip like I was making sure it was real. My throat went dry. That clause was mine. I'd fought for it back in 2017 during the government bidding war that nearly bankrupted us. It was a retention incentive, what the board then called golden handcuffs. I'd built the relationships that won us those contracts. The old CEO understood my value. Marcus never bothered to... I opened the calculator app on my phone, fingers unsteady. If the company's Q4 profit hit even $40 million, which the Denver contract alone could guarantee 15%, meant $6 million. I leaned back, heart pounding. The rain softened outside. A steady hiss. On the table before me, the claws glowed under the lamplight, 12 quiet words that Marcus Vale had forgotten existed. And for the first time since he'd fired me, I felt the smallest flicker of control return. By morning, the rain had cleared, leaving the streets slick and silver under a pale Seattle sky. I texted Evan Ruiz, an old colleague who'd joined Helion the same year I did. We'd survived product recalls, funding droughts, and more than one round of strategic realignment. He replied almost instantly, "Meet me at Harbor Cafe, noon." The place was quiet, the kind of cafe where the smell of espresso lingers in the air and every conversation stays private. Evan was already there, sitting by the window that looked out over Puget Sound. He hadn't changed much, same pressed shirt, same cautious eyes that always saw too much. He didn't waste time. "You're not the only one. Clara," he said softly. 3 other senior engineers, finance and procurement, all gone this week, right before bonuses. I nodded, the pieces falling into place with sick precision. Marcus called it optimization. I called it what it was, clean theft. Evan leaned closer, voice lower. "They're framing it as a restructuring effort to stabilize next quarter's outlook. The board bought it. But we both know the numbers don't need stabilizing." He hesitated, eyes flicking toward the barista before continuing. "I've seen the internal forecast. Clara, Q4 net profit projection sits at $41.2 million. That's before your Denver deal fully clears. 41.2. The number echoed in my mind like a pulse. 15% of that was more than I'd ever dreamed of earning in a lifetime. Evan sipped his coffee, avoiding my gaze now. "They think you're gone for good. They don't realize most of those legal frameworks, the retention policies. The termination clauses came from you." He looked up then, a hint of something like admiration or guilt in his eyes. They forgot who built the foundation they're standing on. I closed my notebook, sliding the pen back into my coat pocket. Then maybe it's time someone reminded them. When we stepped outside, the wind from the bay carried the faint tang of salt and diesel. The city gleamed wet under thin sunlight, and for the first time in days, I felt awake. 2 days later, I sat in the corner booth of a small law office tucked between a florist and a used bookstore on Capitol Hill. The air smelled faintly of lilies and ink. Helen Ortiz walked in carrying 2 coffees, one of them already customized exactly the way I liked, black with a splash of cream. She'd always been that kind of friend, sharp, direct, and quietly protective. We met back in college, before life pulled us into different corners of the system, me into defense contracts. her into government law. Now she ran her own boutique firm that specialized in cases nobody wanted to touch. She listened while I explained everything Marcus's downsizing, the timing, the clause, Evan's numbers. Helen adjusted her glasses and opened the folder I'd brought. The sound of paper sliding against wood filled the quiet. Her eyes skimmed the pages until she stopped on section 15B. She underlined it twice with a pen and leaned back. "This," she said, tapping the paragraph, "is airtight. No ambiguity. No expiration clause. If they fired you without documented cause, they owe you 15% of net quarterly profit. Minimum." My pulse quickened. "Then it's clear." "It should be," she said. "But Marcus won't pay. He'll claim poor performance or insubordination. Expect fake memos, maybe forged evaluations. They'll try to rewrite history before the board ever sees this clause." I looked down at the contract again. The words seemed heavier now, like proof waiting for breath. Helen flipped open her notebook. "Here's what we'll do. You collect every email praising your work, every commendation, every client reference tied to that Denver contract. I'll have my paralegal start building a timeline, document creation dates, file metadata, system logs. If they alter anything, we'll catch it." Her tone was calm, almost surgical. It steadied me. I nodded slowly. No shouting, no threats, just evidence. Helen smiled, not warmly but approvingly. "Exactly. You don't need to make noise." "Clara." "You just need to make them read what they signed." As I stepped out into the gray afternoon, I tucked the contract back into my bag. The city buzzed around me, indifferent. For the first time, I didn't feel small inside it. I felt deliberate. 3 nights later, the storm returned. Wind rattled the windows, and the city lights outside blurred through the rain. I was half asleep on the couch when my laptop chimed a single encrypted notification glowing in the dark. The sender's name read ER. Evan had done it. I entered the password we'd agreed on, the one we used years ago when we shared restricted files between departments. The folder opened slowly, as if the weight of what it carried resisted being seen. Inside were 6 documents. The first one made my chest tighten. Performance Improvement Plan, Mendoza, June 10th. The second written warning, July 22nd. The third final review, September 30th. Each file claimed to predate my termination. But when I right-clicked and checked the properties, the truth surfaced in clean digital ink, date created October 9th, 3 days after I'd been fired. They hadn't even tried to hide it. I opened the next document, an email chain between Marcus Vail and corporate counsel. Trina Sloan, reduce headcount pre-bonus, target high salary staff, ensure cause documentation in place before terminations. Her reply was worse. Understood. We'll fabricate internal justifications as needed. I'll coordinate with HR. I sat there, hands cold against the keyboard, reading and rereading until the words lost their shape. Every suspicion I'd had was now a line of text, a digital confession. I plugged in an external drive, renamed it Truth, and began transferring the files. The progress bar crept forward, blue against black. Outside, thunder cracked, rolling over the sound. I glanced at the framed photo of Daniel on my bookshelf, the one from our trip to the coast, his arm around me, wind in his hair. For the first time since he'd died, I didn't feel him as absence but as presence, steady and watching. By the time the transfer finished, the fear that had lived inside me for weeks was gone. What replaced it wasn't anger. It was focus. I closed the laptop and whispered to the dark, "Let's see how well they handle transparency." Helen called the next morning, her voice steady and clipped. "It's ready." At her office. She laid the single-page letter on heavy stationery across the desk between us. Her handwriting in the margins was neat, deliberate, every sentence weighed for impact. The header bore her firm's crest, the language coldly precise per Section 15B of Ms. Mendoza's employment contract. We formally request payment of 15% of Helion Dynamics' quarterly net profit, owed due to termination without cause. Attached were the exhibit's metadata screenshots, email threads, and time-stamped evidence showing each forged document created after my firing. The deadline for settlement was clearly stated 10 business days. Helen looked at me over the rim of her glasses. We send this by certified mail and electronic copy. The moment they receive it, they'll panic. You're not just a disgruntled employee. Clara, you're a liability with proof. I exhaled slowly. Let them read what they signed. That afternoon, she pressed the envelope into my hand. It was heavier than I expected. A single sheet of paper, but it carried 12 years of my work and one man's arrogance. I watched her drop the second copy into the courier's pouch, seal it, and hand it off. 4 days later, a delivery driver appeared at my door with another envelope creamstock, embossed logo of Helion's law firm. I set it on the table, made myself a cup of tea, and only then slid it open. The letter was short. Settlement offer $250 through $1,000. Conditioned strict non-disclosure agreement. No further claims, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing. I stared at the number, not angry, just almost amused. They thought they could buy silence in bulk, like office supplies. I folded the offer neatly along its center crease, fed it into the shredder, and listened to the low hum as the pages disappeared into strips. If they're offering $250,000, I said softly, they already know what it's really worth. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the windows. I stood there in the quiet, the shredded paper still warm in my hands, and felt the first calm before a different kind of storm. The meeting notice came on a gray Tuesday morning subject line resolution discussion. Helen read it twice before forwarding it to me with a single line. They blinked. We arrived at Helion's headquarters just after 9. The same lobby that once carried my footsteps now felt colder, the kind of cold that lives in polished glass and silence. A receptionist led us to the top floor, into the executive boardroom where I'd once presented million-dollar contracts. Marcus Vale was already there, seated at the far end of the long glass table. 2 attorneys flanked him, their briefcases lined up like armor. Across from them sat the chair of the board, a woman I'd only met once during a quarterly review. She gave me a nod, curious, cautious, assessing. Helen opened her laptop and connected to the screen at the front of the room. Her tone was calm but unyielding. We'll begin with a brief review of the documentation supporting our claim under Section 15B. The first slide appeared a performance review labeled September 30th. Then the metadata window beside it date created October 9th, 3 days post-termination. A murmur rippled across the table. Next came the email thread, Marcus to corporate counsel reduce headcount pre-bonus, target high salary staff, ensure cause documentation in place. Helen didn't look at him as she spoke. This was forwarded internally within your HR department, Mr. Vale. Metadata confirms the chain originated from your account. Marcus shifted in his seat. One of the lawyers leaned in to whisper, but the chair of the board raised a hand. The room went still. Mr. Vale, she said evenly, pack your things. For a moment, no one moved. Then Marcus stood, the legs of his chair scraping the floor, and walked out without a word. The door clicked shut behind him, softer than I expected. Helen closed her laptop. The chair exhaled, then turned to me. Ms. Mendoza. We'll settle this appropriately. I nodded once, not triumphantly, but with quiet relief. For the first time in months, my shoulders felt light. The fight wasn't over, but the balance had shifted finally. Unmistakably in my favor, 3 days after the meeting, Helen called me just past noon. Her voice carried that calm satisfaction lawyers only get when paperwork finally catches up with justice. It's done, she said. Check your inbox. The settlement agreement arrived in a single, password-protected file. I opened it slowly, reading each line. The amount was there in black and white: 15% of Helion Dynamics audited quarterly profit, $6,180,000. No arguments, no conditions, no denials, just numbers and signatures. But I didn't sign right away. I met Helen the next morning at her office and slid a handwritten note across her desk. 2 additions, I said. She read them once, then twice. You're serious? Completely. The first, a consulting contract for Evan Ruiz, $350,000 for 1 year, non-discretionary. The second, reinstatement and full back pay for Marta Chen, a senior analyst from finance who'd been fired after refusing to falsify numbers. Helen nodded slowly. I'll present it as a condition of goodwill. They'll agree it's cheaper than another scandal. 2 days later, the board signed everything without a word of resistance. Marcus Vale's resignation hit the news that afternoon. Helion CEO steps down to pursue other opportunities. No mention of clauses or lawsuits, just the usual corporate euphemism for exile. I watched the press release on my phone while stirring my coffee, the steam curling up into the kitchen light. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like exhale. That evening, Helen stopped by my house with the finalized packet. They wired the funds this morning, she said, smiling. And both Evan and Marta received their notices. I signed the last page, the pen steady in my hand. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of rain returning outside. For months, every sound had felt like a reminder of loss. Now, for the first time, silence sounded different, like space, like the beginning of something I hadn't planned for peace. The wire arrived on a Thursday morning. No fanfare, no email announcement, just a quiet notification from the bank. Incoming deposit $6,180. For a long moment, I couldn't move. The number glowed on the screen, steady and unreal, like it belonged to someone else. I closed the laptop and sat at the kitchen table, letting the stillness fill the room. Daniel's jacket still hung by the door, the same place it had been since the night he left for the hospital. I'd kept it there as if he might return to claim it. That morning, I finally took it down and folded it gently into the cedar chest. The next few days passed in quiet motion. I paid off every hospital invoice, each one cleared with a single click. Then the mortgage, the car loan, the lingering credit line that had carried us through his treatments, one by one. The debts vanished. When the last payment confirmation appeared, I felt something inside loosen a knot I hadn't even realized was still there. I hired a small crew to fix the roof Daniel had always meant to repair and repainted the porch he built years ago. The house looked alive again, steady against the gray Seattle rain. A week later, I sat down with a local foundation director to establish a modest scholarship fund in Daniel's name, the Mendoza Aerospace Grant, for students who'd lost a parent to illness. It wasn't grand, but it felt right. A continuation, not a monument. That evening, I stood on the porch as the first drizzle returned, the city lights shimmering across the bay. I could almost hear Daniel's laugh in the wind. He thought firing me saved him 6 figures. I murmured, "It cost him $6 million." The rain softened against the railing, and I smiled, faint but certain. That wasn't revenge. I said, the words quiet and true. That was balance.